Hello, hello. Welcome back to the Upset Podcast. We're here for another week of great conversation and dialogue. And of course, I have the crew with me, and here they are. What's up, guys?
Hello,
Hello
family.
there.
Hello,
Hello.
everybody.
Happy Sunday.
Good to be back.
Nick is back.
Good
Yes.
to be
Yeah.
back. Good to be back. I missed you guys.
Yay.
I want to thank you. I want to thank my lawyers for renegotiating my contract and getting me back.
It was a tough one, too. He wanted too much money.
Yeah. That discussion on tithe
Yeah,
got them all been
I want
out.
to thank you. 6-figure salary here. 6 figures giving me no salary. That's it.
It's depending on where the decimal point is.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
There you go.
Good to be back, though.
Yes, great to have you back. Everybody's doing good.
Good.
Doing
Doing
well.
well.
Great.
Yeah, everybody's doing all right. Awesome. Well, you know, we've had some great topics over the last few weeks, and we don't think this one will be any different. We're talking about something that has kind of been something we discuss at the dinner table, even in the church pews, all around, and it's a question of worship. And so Charles, aka Chuck, is going to lead us in this discussion on worship. So turn it over to you now.
Why, thank you. I'm happy to be one of the only two civilians on the podcast. We're surrounded by experienced theologians, and so I'm sure we'll get some
And don't
very
forget
good get some good feedback. But the topic of worship has really come front and center since the pandemic, started. I mean, there had always been discussion and controversy about worship, kind of worship music, you name it. But since the pandemic, we've had to do a major paradigm shift in how we conduct worship. And I think part of the results of that is predicated upon one's personal thoughts about what worship is. There have been some that thought the pandemic brought a good thing by us worshiping online, and it gave them a different approach to, the worship process and the rituals, so forth and so on. There are others who say, no, I don't like this. I want to be back in church. There are others that say that you will never see me walk into a church, but I would definitely join your congregation online because I enjoy the music and I enjoy the preaching, so forth and so on. And now that could be a reflection of them personally. It could be introverts. It could be people that are somewhat antisocial. So it fits them well. So that aspect of the whole worship discussion in of itself is worth 1 or 2 episodes. But I wanted to start with what do we define worship to be? Let's pandemic or no pandemic, but the activity, the focus of worship, what is it to us?
Well, in the quietude that presented itself after your statement.
We wanted you to go first.
Yeah, we
I'll
did.
go-
We did want
That's
to
why
go
we
first.
waited.
Yep.
So we can fix it.
Yeah.
Waiting for the button.
The
Go ahead,
controversy
Go ahead.
is on.
He said
You
so
know,
we
the-
could
one,
fix
I think
it.
one
Go
of the
ahead, Chief.
issues that we have is that we define worship as an event that is defined by place and activity, where instead of defining worship as the state of mind that leads to certain acts, I would think that we, just taking a look at the Greek word for worship is proskuneo, which is a word. It's strange. It's a strange word. It means to bow down, but it actually, etymologically, the word actually is reflective of a dog licking his master's hand.
Oh my.
And the Old English
Surrenderance.
worship, the Old English worthship. It is the recognition of the worth of another above oneself that leads to certain actions, bowing down, or giving an offering. And so, anytime we discern a greater worth that leads us to act in accordance to that discernment, we are worshiping.
Mhm.
Not bad, Nick. It didn't shock me too badly.
Right. Yeah.
And I
They're
just
still young, Marlene. They're still young.
I think
got a
I
lot
think-
to learn,
I
right?
think what got us a little edge with the dog licking the hand thing. We were like, uh-oh.
Got a little
But you know what? I like that. And the
Yeah.
reason why I like that is because I had to go back and look at the word worship, the word, I should say, and say, what is that like? So I'm glad that you brought it from, it's the Greek. I love to study the Greek, and I'd love to go back to it. But what I saw out of that is showing love too, showing, and I heard the word action come out of it.
Pauses.
Yeah, right. So to me, when in your explanation of it, I don't think it's far from what any of us would think that worship is. I think again, when Chuck started off and they said, and you hear the words worship service, there's always something connected to it. Worship music, down to the point where we call some music that's in church music, but not worship music. So how do we determine what that is? I think I'd like to keep in my mindset showing love and adoration for and making that person or that thing higher than who we are. And I think you said that, though, Nick. You did say that.
And I just want to add to what Nick said so well. He did a good job with that. When Paul is talking in Romans about your body's being a living sacrifice, that total surrendering of the heart, soul, mind, body, that all being worship, and so it becomes who you are. You live that life, and so you act certain ways, not for legalism, but because of your adoration for God, your worship, giving of your whole life to God. That's also a part of worship.
So would you say that worship requires a state of heart and mind that is surrendered and has love for God or Christ?
Yes, I would say that.
I was hoping you would, because this is what makes it fun.
No.
I want to read a passage of scripture to you.
Mhm.
This is a man who is not converted, who does not love the Lord. We find a demon-possessed man in Mark chapter 5. When he saw Jesus from afar off, he ran and worshiped him.
Mm-hmm.
So worship does not necessarily require love and affection. What it requires is a recognition of worth that acknowledges the superiority or the sovereignty of another. Now,
But
we add
also,
love
Nick,
to it.
I'm
Beg your
sorry.
pardon? We add
Go
love
ahead,
to it.
finish.
Yeah, we add love to it, and then it becomes an act of worship that includes adoration, or we can add celebration to it, and it's an act of worship that includes praise. But
Crazy.
worship begins with a state of mind that says, I recognize your sovereignty over me, and I will act in accordance with that. Think about it this way. At the end of time, there will be a great worship service
Yeah.
where every knee will bow
That's
and
right.
every tongue will confess.
Mm.
But everybody doesn't love the Lord, and everybody's not adoring him. But it is still worship.
Nick, let me back up a little bit.
Preaching.
These demons were
Back.
inside of this man, right?
Say that again.
The demons, Mark 5. The demons were inside of this man. Who worshipped him? The man or the demons in the man, or both?
I'd say both.
I would be inclined to say both. That both of them worshipped.
And the reason why,
Ultimately, the man surrendered, but they both worshipped.
and I say that because the demons knew who they were coming in contact with.
Absolutely.
These are the same demons that were with him, Lucifer, in the beginning. So I also believe is once we recognize who God is in our lives,
Yeah.
you can't hold my mule. Now that's praise. Holding my mule is the praise side of it. But the worship side of it is the acknowledgement of who it is, and then to show who it is. And I'll give you an example. For example, when you're in the city, and I think this is for like Chuck and Nick, when you're in the city and Mr. Softy is driving down the street.
Yeah.
Come on, you know what I'm talking about, right?
You hear that?
Kids outside, everybody's outside,
Exactly.
and you hear
Right.
Hey,
Yeah, they did that in Brooklyn too, but I'm sure
I know
they
they
had them
do it
in
in
Brooklyn.
Brooklyn too. I understand.
And in the suburbs of Virginia,
There you go.
we just scream ice cream.
Yeah, right.
And I was
Mr.
just
Softy is international. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I went for the city guys, but okay. Now that y'all straighten me out, I'm thinking about there was never a thought process to
Right.
what our shout was going to be about, or what our excitement was going to be about. All we thought about was ice cream. You know, that was coming down the street, and it didn't matter who was in our way. It didn't matter what was it, because we already know the sweetness or the taste or whatever the case may be. I think we have lost this. People have lost who God is personally in our lives in order for us to say this is what worship is. Let me just switch and come back real quick. So worship for me was my parents. I'm talking about as a kid. My parents would come, and it was 7 o'clock in the morning, and it was 8 o'clock at night. So when you woke up in the morning, it was worship. Lord, in the morning thou shalt hear my voice ascending high. That's what it was, right? All 7, 10 verses of it, right? That they had to go through, right? And then everybody had to pray in a circle or whatever the case. Now, 8 o'clock was a different worship. The 8 o'clock worship was you sing out of the hymnal, and the hymnal only. You sang songs in the hymnal, and then after that, everybody had to, what did you do for the day? And then you had to go through the Sabbath school lesson of that day. And then everybody, I mean, this thing lasted about an hour and something. It lasted about an hour and something, and that was considered
Wow.
worship, right?
Well, let me ask you
But
this,
was it
Pat.
really
As you
worship?
were doing that, what effect did that have on you about your attitude of worship, though? You had to do, you as a young person, you had to do that in your family's home twice a day. At the end of the day, how did that affect you? Did it affect in a positive or negative way of worship? Did you feel it was your worship, or you were just participating in someone else's worship?
No, I believe I was. Thank you, Chuck, because I believe I was participating in my mom and dad's worship, or my mom's worship, or my dad's worship, or whatever. And I'm saying this because there's a mass of us who do it that way and continue to do it that way,
Right.
instead of teaching he's the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and we pay homage to him. We didn't do all of that, right? Until I had a personal relationship with God myself, then my worship changed. All of that changed. So it really became ritualistic. And I hate to say it, what was going on at home was exactly what was going on at church. You could take it away from there.
Yeah.
I think we have to be aware that worship in and of itself is not enough. The worship is what happens in an encounter with a God who is greater and higher and sovereign.
Like that.
And as mortals, as creatures, we recognize it. That is worship. So the devil can worship. But what happens next is worship requires a response, which is an act of worship, and normally surrender. And then what we do as human beings is we collect those responses and we try to create an atmosphere that will lead us into acts of worship that will deepen surrender. And that is liturgy. Those are the things that we do, the forms of worship, liturgy. So there's worship, acts of worship, and then the collection of them is liturgy, so.
Liturgy, and that's why I came up with church, guys. And I know, Chuck, I'll give it back over to you. I just, when I look at that liturgic worship, even as a pastor now, I'm thinking to myself, did I make a plan for people to follow, or stand up, sit down when you hear the organ at this time? I remember growing up, even in our bulletin, and I have an old bulletin from the 80s. I could show you where it says it has 2 dots on it. That means stand up.
Stand up.
Right.
One
Yeah,
dot on
I
it meaning
remember
to
those.
sit back
Yeah.
down. I mean, I could
Right.
remember those things, and I said to myself, is this really worship? Is this really what it is? And again, Nick, you're coming out with the great definitions of what it is. But what about my heart? You understand what I'm saying? What's going on with my heart to say, I recognize him. Now, what is the next action that follows after that? And I believe that cannot be scripted.
Right.
Right.
When I joined the church, I was a teenager, joined in North Philadelphia. I really didn't have any real relationship with the Lord prior to that action of being baptized. And as I kind of grew into the church and understanding how it operates and the worship process, early on, I found myself just going through the motions, and that there was not a real relationship linked to all of that. And it wasn't until I got older and understood that this really is about me and the Lord and not me and the church. And then I started to understand and could then have successfully personal worships at home or devotions or even by myself. I mean, at that time I was working for the government, state government, and I had my Bible and my Sabbath school lesson and devotional lessons at work. I reached that point, but in the beginning it was just, you know, follow the crowd. This is what we do. We stand up, we sing, we sit down, we stand. The preacher preaches, and then there's the children's story, and all the kids go running down the aisles, and so it was a week after week after week after week of that, and it got to a point where it was just mechanical. There wasn't any spirit in it. As I grew, as my relationship with the Lord grew, consequently, it became less about the ritual and less about the action of worship, and I started to find myself bristling sometimes at church, on Sabbath. It's like, why are we doing all this?
Right.
This is not my relationship with God. You stand up and sit down and you do this, do that, turn to your neighbor and say, hello, neighbor. And all. I'm just like, really? I was like,
now you do want to practice hospitality.
Yeah. But it was so regimented, it
Yeah,
was so regimented. And as my relationship improved, it became more of a personal thing for me. So I tolerated, the ritual, the process, to get through it. I didn't necessarily, push it away, but it became more real to me. So that leads me to the question, what has worship become? Now we defined it, we gave some experiences. Today, 2021, what has worship become to us as a people?
Well, I want to say that I started off kind of how Tally started off. I viewed worship as a service. Like growing up, we went to worship. Worship took place at church. In the program, it said call to worship, and then it said worship. So it's just worship was always associated with church and what happens when you go to church. But even as we're talking, I'm like, wait, it always says praise and worship, but technically, how we're defining it should say worship and praise. But anyway, that's another thing. But I remember when I had to participate in the program and I had to do the call to worship, and for the first time I stopped to think and say, what is the call to worship? Like what? And someone explained it to me.
Just call out, y'all. Let's worship.
Yeah, let's worship. And I realized it was always generally a scripture that talked about God and reminded people of who he's supposed to be. So I get it now. It's connecting. You're trying to say, this is why we should be reverencing him and recognizing him at this moment. But I just wonder how many of us got that is what was happening, or was it just a scripture? You know what I mean? It's like I felt like I was falling into that. This is what the program says. Let's follow it. But to answer your question, I think for me now, growing in my relationship with God, I realized I can worship anywhere. I mean, it's not relegated to a building or to a call to it. It's something that in myself, in those moments when I'm alone, in those moments when I'm in my car and I just stop to think about who he is in my life, I'm worshiping and no one even has to witness it. You know what I mean? Like it's just me and God having our moment. So I think for me personally, that's what it's become. But I still feel like for the church at large, it's still very much what it's always been,
program mechanized.
I'm gonna say this too.
That relationship. I'm sorry, Pat. Let me just get this out because I'll forget it. It relates to what Latasha was saying, and a little bit about what I was saying about personal relationship as it affects worship. When we were doing the Netto 4 Breath of Life satellite evangelism back in Netto 4, one of the things we happened after each broadcast, Elder Pearson would come back and read the emails from people who have responded to the broadcast. And one email really stuck out to me. He said that someone had written him and said that he had been a local elder for 40 years. And he said the message that night inspired him. He said, this was the first time I realized I didn't know Jesus.
Wow.
Out of the 40 years of being a local elder, he now has met Jesus for real. And here's someone who conducts worship, but really didn't have that personal connection with God. And now his worship service, of course, it's the exact opposite.
Well, I think, Chuck, that that's a real thing because many of us do not even understand God, and so if I
Hmm.
mean we understand that He's the Creator, but that personal relationship and who He really is misunderstood, and so we ask, what is church now? It had become just a ritual. If And that's why I believe worship is that total surrender unto God, my life, my heart, my mind. So whatever he'll ask of me to do, I'll do. So you have statues who just come to the church, sit, sometimes they get something, sometimes they don't. They leave, they're the same way. There's no change, and because oftentimes they hear messages, if you don't do this, you don't do that, you're going to
Right.
hell,
Right.
and so there's like, God is just something up there that if I don't do everything he tells me, he's just gonna burn me up, right? And so
Hmm.
Mhm.
they don't get to know who God really is and that he's a
Hmm.
loving God, that he really does want to save you. And he's concerned about your everyday life and he loves you. He's concerned about everything about you, individually. And so I think there's so many misconceptions. And if we as preachers don't teach, the love of Christ and who God is, then,
Hmm.
the people will always just, I don't care if I don't get it. That's why you got so many people who don't come to church because there is nothing that they're missing. I mean, some are
Mhm.
wholly connected, but guys, truth be told, many of them are still very acclimated with the secular. They're doing everything else, but
Right.
not the spiritual. And so they're like, I'm good. I believe that there is a God, and they're satisfied with that. And so um we see the struggles now, and I know that,
Mhm.
like me as a pastor, many of us are, wanting people to come back to church because church has changed. And so now you have to totally change and try and teach people what true worship is, and
Hmm.
giving, and trying to establish a good service, right? Because they would go back to the service, Tosh, trying to establish a good service that is going to feed people spiritually, and it's
Mhm.
challenging. I mean, if we can go there, it's
Well,
challenging when your singers don't want to come back,
well,
and it's you preaching, and I mean all your help is gone, and so it's challenging today.
it's. I think we have to remind ourselves once again, and there's something that was said earlier that brings me to this, that worship depends or is contingent upon revelation. The idea of worship begins with recognizing the worth of God, and
Mhm.
and and in recognizing that worth, acting in accordance with it. But that depends on revelation. God has to be presented. I'll give you a
Hmm.
good example of a worship service. No music, no choir, no church. In Genesis 18, Abraham is just sitting by his tent, and he looks up,
Mm.
and three figures appear, and those three figures are coming to announce the destruction of Sodom. And and
Mhm.
and then it says that Abraham runs from his tent door, bows himself down, and says, "If I found favor in your sight,
Mm.
don't pass me by. Let me give you an offering." Now, this is clearly worship. There's no
Mm.
choir,
Hmm.
there's no liturgy,
Yep.
but he recognizes value. But it is all based on presentation, revelation, and now it is our task as ministers to make the revelation. Tasha made
Yeah.
mention of the call to worship. The idea is to help reveal God. When
Right.
oh,
Hmm.
magnify the
Mhm.
Lord with me.
Mhm.
The
Hmm.
text says, "I will magnify the Lord at all times," because people come to church and they have completely lost sight of God. And
Yes.
our task
Mhm.
becomes present, reveal, and then when people are presented with God, then they may be able to reestablish worth and act in accordance. We need to separate worship, which is the state of mind and recognition,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
acts of worship and
Hmm.
forms,
Right.
and that will help us some, because then we won't start saying, well, is that song worship? We'll realize,
Right.
we'll
Right.
ask the
Right.
question now, how is this song an
Right.
act of worship or form?
Hmm.
And that
Hmm.
goes a step further though, because I've heard a lot of your sermons, Tally, and one of the things I
I'm
think that
sorry.
you're one of the things I think you're really great at, among many things, is
Give
in
that
each
woman a raise.
sermon helping an individual understand who God is and why it's important to be connected to him. So it's not just the call to worship, it's not just the song, it's even the message that's preached that day that should lead people to understand why worship is important, even when you leave this space. And this is why, so I think even in our services, we have to realize that every part of the service should be designed to help people understand worship beyond just that service, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Guys, we
Right,
would
and
have to
beyond the
go.
ritual.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and we'd have to go deep because we live in a society that is used to entertainment,
Right.
right? And so when they come to church, they want to be entertained, and if the
Mhm.
entertainment is not up to par, it's like, I'm out of here. This is boring. This is
This
not
ain't
getting me,
worship.
this is not worship. Yeah. And so
Right.
therefore people will leave my church and try to go over here tally, because they think it's better,
Right.
And so we have
Or
to,
they like the praise team better.
Did you
oh
just call
yeah,
me
oh
entertainment?
yeah. No,
But
But now, but
I did not- I didn't want to-
entertainment can be worship can
Yeah.
have entertaining elements.
Yeah, I was gonna. Yeah.
and we hate to
That's
hear
true.
that. We hate to hear that because
Yeah.
entertainment sounds secular.
It
Yeah.
does.
We don't want to
There are
have
many
those words
places in the
same
Bible
sentence.
where they danced. There are many places
Right.
in the Bible,
Right.
I think the big, and hold on, let me, I wanted to add this piece in. And that's why we have to be careful when we talk about church and church gathering, because at home, I can get praise and worship at Tally's church.
Mhm.
And then I can, if everybody's starting at 11, I can get praise and worship at Tally's. And I could move and I can go to GP's church and hear a good children's story from their team. And I can come back and I can go ahead and listen to a good sermon in Alabama. And I could turn around and I come back
Yeah,
and hear good.
that's worship a la carte.
Eh,
Yeah, well, I mean, it is. That's
Mhm.
what it is.
which is the reason why it is important that when we come back to church or as we come back to the building,
Mhm.
worship will have to change because our style, you know what? I can't even now. I'm even careful of the words that I use because the words
You're
that I
about
use
to,
don't
yeah,
fit
that's how the
anymore.
people think
Right.
that the
Yeah,
style.
Right.
And
Stop
so
all
now
of
they're
that.
used
I know.
to
Mhm.
Listen,
Mhm.
I'm gonna give you a great example, Tally. I can preach for an hour and 15 minutes and nobody will move, right? Because there's a bit of entertainment in
Mhm.
it.
Mhm.
Online, I
Worship is a
can't do
very
that.
entertaining.
Online, I can't do that. Online, I have to preach for 25 minutes.
Oh,
I
you're
don't.
talking about length.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Length.
And the
Okay.
reason why I have to do that is because now it's different, right? It's
It's a different
I can't
environment.
get up now. When I get up, I go to Tally's church. I want to thank Reverend Tally for allowing me to be here, and I have to thank
Mhm.
this one and thank that
Right.
one, and
Talk about your
man,
trip.
yeah,
Yeah.
all of that to
When I
get people.
stepped off the plane, yeah.
Yeah, that's the time when some people just go to the restroom and they come back till you get to the,
Till you get to where
the
you at.
verse text, yeah.
And that's what I mean by change, everybody. What I mean by that is people want Jesus now.
oh yeah.
Let's
yeah.
get rid of all
Quick.
the fluff. Let's get rid of all of that. Pat, what is it that you're trying to say? Say it so that I could be inspired by the word of God. It ain't about you anymore because I can go here. People are yearning. And let's go back to that, Chuck. People at Chuck and Tally. The reason why I'm at you because now people are yearning to get close to the person or the love, the
Right.
God that they want to get close to. So please present that
Well,
table before me.
Well, I think, and this is an interesting conundrum here with, there's the argument that, well, we can't have church online all the time. We got to have communal worship and so forth. I agree. But I think what we should learn from the pandemic and the whole worship experience is that there are many people who otherwise would have not gotten a good relationship with the Lord unless they were online. Some of them, their first experience was online. Now, we would hope that that would grow to a yearning for communal worship.
Sure.
Oh, this is great. The pastor's great. The people seem nice in all their little boxes. But I'd love to go meet them. I'd love to be part of that church. Before COVID came along, what were televangelists doing? They were showing their huge churches and their music groups and whatever. And what happens? People see that and they say, hey, that church is just a few miles from me. I'm going to go to that church as a result of seeing them in media. So I'm hoping that what worship has has become for us is deeper thoughts into how we can reach people in a communal setting as well as in a online setting. It shouldn't be either or. There should be a hybrid of that, because eventually people are going to want to have communal worship, have relationships and see people, talk to people live. But I think that just my opinion on this, I just think pre-COVID, the methods in which we delivered worship via our services has actually been harmful in some ways.
Ooh, wow.
Mm.
Well, just to address something that that Charles was saying, what people want when they come together is not worship; they want fellowship.
Yes.
I mean,
To make that distinction.
worship, and we need to be mindful of that. The words that and here's why it's important. There are two scriptural touch points that we need to keep in mind. Jesus makes a statement that is one of the most poignant and trenchant statements in all of the Gospels. For the time is coming, and now is, when the Lord is looking for those who will worship Him in spirit and in truth. Because that's who God, he said, because those are the people that God is looking for. And then at the very heart of what we're supposed to be about, at the very core, the throbbing heart of our message, is that an angel is seen flying in the midst of heaven, saying the hour of his judgment has come. And we focused on judgment because we like judgment, But what we don't focus on is, and worship him who made heaven and earth. And at the heart of our message is a reclaiming of the sense of the value that God brings. Because the book of Revelation is completely about value systems. What will you value? What will you yield yourself to? And hold my calls for me, Marlene.
Yeah,
And so
That was an alarm.
It's that value. It's that value.
Oh, Marlene is woke. Marlene said, "I'm woke now."
I'm woke.
But in the middle of our message is the fact that
Oh my
we
goodness.
are telling people that the true worthiness, that which we should submit, the only thing worthy of our submitting ourselves to and recognizing the sovereignty of, is the God who is the creator of all things. So
Right.
worship is very important as a state of mind and being,
Ah,
and then acts of worship come from that. Forms of
and
worship follow
and
that.
can I really quick talk about acts of worship, right? You know, when we were in college, Michael Jordan was doing his thing. You wanted to know everything about him, not just what he's doing on the court, but you want to know what house he lived in, what was he driving, what was his next endorsements, his commercials. Do you understand what I'm saying? When I think about God and what he's done for me, or how much he cares about me, now I want to, now the word adoration becomes louder. The way I read. I give you, I stumble over this because I get to this point where I remember, and I hate to put the date out there, but I remember when I met Christ. Like, I know it sounds weird, right? But I remember when I met Christ. I was in Orlando, Florida, at the they closed it down now. Come on, y'all, help me with it. This the place in Florida where
Brothel.
no, not that. Definitely not. I do believe that at the Advent Health bought it. Anyway, it was
the experience.
Bible Experience. Wow, thank you.
Right.
And I was sitting there watching one of its plays, and Jesus came out.
The Holy Land.
The Holy Land Experience. That's right. Bible Holy Land Experience. And Jesus walked out. He said, "My children." I started to cry. I mean, I started to cry, right? All the children ran up to him, and I wanted to run. I wanted to run with them. I started to cry. I'm not talking about,
Right.
I started to bawl and recognize not the white Jesus. And I really mean, I'm not trying to be like, not the white.
No, I get you. I get you.
But all of a sudden, everything in the word that I ever read before came alive at that very moment. And immediately I said, man, I need to serve that same Jesus. And things changed for me at that very spot. I just know that I can always go back there. So now you know, when I'm singing a song that actually hits me, I can cry about it now, and I don't care what you think about it. I don't care how
Right.
you feel, I
Right.
feel, because even when
Mhm.
Latasha was explaining, this is what I was going to jump on, Chuck. When Latasha was explaining, I could be driving. Her face had an attitude with it, like, and her that attitude to me was, I don't care who's watching while I'm driving. I don't
Mhm.
care
Right.
who's,
Mm-mm.
you are not going to take this experience away from me. It's almost an
Right.
attitude of, you do what you want to do, but I'm praising my God anyway. I think that we have lost that. We have lost the one-to-one.
Mhm.
Nick said it. The biggest word that Nick used that has taught me even today is the word revelation, or for us to give him the opportunity of revealing himself to us
Yeah.
at all times.
Mhm.
And that
Right.
to me is where worship comes. So now, if I should do it all over again from scratch, where I can bring my children back, I would take them out of the traditional realm of 633, when we all see Jesus, what a great, I'll take that all out and be like, listen, tell me, what was your encounter with God today?
Mm.
Hmm.
Do
Mhm.
you understand what I'm saying? I would change,
Right.
my
Right.
line of questioning would now change. What song, any song that remind you of, to be able to thank him and praise him? My whole way that I trained my children for worship would change. So I guess I got to wait for grandchildren.
But there's a
Well,
science to that, when you have worship leaders, that's a
Mhm.
real thing. It's not
Mhm.
It
about
is.
just leading out a song. Like,
That's right.
sometimes we used to get annoyed when they start talking before the song comes on, but really, they are setting the tone for
That's right.
why
That's right.
you should worship, or to get you in
Mhm.
a spirit of thinking about what God has done for you, putting your
Right.
cares behind, recognizing, worship leaders play just as important of a role sometimes as the pastor in a service, because there's an invitation. However, at the same time, there's that line where when they say, wave your hands, stand on your feet, some
Mhm.
people are uncomfortable with that.
Right.
Don't
Right.
don't tell
They
me
don't
how to
do it.
worship.
Right. Right. Right.
If I'm worshiping, the response is gonna be
Right.
natural, right? So
Right.
don't
Yeah.
tell me to clap my hands.
Yeah.
Right.
People
It's like going on your
And
honeymoon and somebody giving you a sheet saying, "Here are the directions for what happens
right,
next." I
right,
mean,
right.
right.
it's unnatural.
Well,
Yeah.
and we judge individuals who don't
Based on that,
respond.
that's
Mhm.
right.
You have a whole lot of folk raising their hands and, looking up and crying, and then you got this guy sitting next to that person with a pair of glasses looking like, just saw a ghost. And
And
you look at him and say, "Boy, this guy doesn't have any spirit. This guy
Right.
doesn't have any."
Yeah.
He could be in a worshipful mindset even at that moment. So who are
Mhm.
we to judge?
Right,
Which leads me to worship styles.
right.
Sometimes worship styles make or break congregations. Did you
I
know
I
that?
just wanted to, and before we get, because I did want to respond real very quickly, Chuck, to the communal worship and having to
Mhm.
come together. We were talking about the fellowship and why that is so important, and I'm often reminded in Hebrews chapter 10 when Paul was saying to the people, it's important to come together. It doesn't I mean, you don't have to be behind four walls, but even when you come together as a group, if you come together in a small group study and some form, because as a people just going through life today, you need that exhortation, you need that
Mhm.
coming together, which is very, very
Mhm.
important. And I just wanted to read Hebrews chapter 10, starting at verse 24, and it says, and let us consider one another, right, in order to stir up love and good works, right?
Mhm.
And so when we come together, we're stirring together love, encouraging the love of one another and stirring up, the works of Christ, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as is the manner of some, but exhorting one another all the more. All right, as the day is approaching. And so I just wanted to get that in real quick,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
While it is perfectly fine to stay at home and to worship and to go through these, which we should establish a daily worship period anyway. But there are times that we have to come together, to be encouraged, as so many people are falling, away from God. They don't understand God. They get discouraged by God when, they feel He's not answering their prayers. And so that coming together in fellowship is very important. I just wanted to share that before you went into the different styles of worship.
And I want to add to that too, because I think in this discussion, I've realized that people come to church for different reasons. So
Or that.
That's right.
some may come for their worship experience or to ignite
Right.
that worship experience. Some have worshiped all week long and they just really want to be around the saints. They come for the
Yes.
fellowship. They might not
Right.
even be there for the
That's right.
message.
Yep.
And so some of us say, "Oh, they missed the word. They missed the worship. Why are they even here? Because they need the
Right.
fellowship." You know what I mean? So it's like even
Right.
as we look at worship and why people come to church, we have to leave room for the different reasons and the all of the things that we need that may not be all inclusive.
Let me add also what a response of worship is participation also.
Yeah.
A response of worship is also teaching. You understand what I'm saying? It's not just hearing the word, but to be able to participate. Well, hearing is also participating. So when I start thinking about Sabbath school classes and Sabbath school teachers, I'm talking about our denomination. When I start thinking about Bible studies, it's still an act of worship and paying homage to who God is in your own life. How can you teach something, or how can you preach something that you don't believe in? Or so even before we got to the styles of worship, Marlena, I do agree with you. Iron sharpens iron, right? Some of the best worship services, man. Now y'all messing me up with these words. Some of the best times that we have spent together, testimony period.
Yes.
Many
Yes.
times, right? And just to think, whoa, sister so-and-so is going through the same thing that I'm going through.
Right.
So-and-so is going through the same thing. So there's nothing wrong with us coming together in fellowship with, let me add this, a lot of young people miss that.
Yes.
Yep.
When I talk to a lot of young people say, PG, why don't you just start a church over here? We all just get COVID together as long as we worship in and we all,
That sounds responsible.
And by the way, they're serious. Hold on. By the way, they're serious. That's not.
I know.
But Pat, listen. I feel you there. I mean, it's a risk, but I had a young group at my house last week, a bunch of young adults and youth. We were here together, 25, 30 of us all maxed up. I said, if anybody gets COVID and you tell them you were at my house, I will kill you.
Wow.
And right. But listen, it's real. They want to get together.
They
and
want
so
to be together.
right. And so, we are creating a way that we can, come together, vaccinated, maxed up, because they need the fellowship.
But let me go back to styles. Now let me take your styles.
Wait, before you go to styles,
go
I
ahead,
have a curveball question.
Here comes the curve.
It's a prerequisite to the discussion of styles.
Go ahead.
In your training as pastors,
go ahead, Nick, answer this
what
one.
area of your training or your understanding of what worship should be on all levels, was there a train of study or courses on how to conduct worship? Did that ever happen in school?
It was an elective option.
classes.
It was an elective option.
Wow.
It was an
I was going
elective.
to say,
Not
GP is the
mandatory.
last person at the seminary. Yeah.
Yeah. So worship and music was optional. It was not mandatory.
Yep.
Really?
I still remember my
Yep.
teacher.
Now we did have church liturgy.
Yes.
Yeah, we had that.
We had church
And I had a
liturgy.
worship class.
But they teach it from the historical standpoint, not for you to do it. This is where it came from. I'll give you a great example, like tithe and offering is worship, right? Giving tithe and offering is worship, where in some congregations, they don't have it a part of worship. A part of the service, not worship, a part of the service, you bring it with you as you come in. So it's not a part of it. I remember those things, learning I remember a lot of things that we have in Adventism. I don't know if some people are going to stop watching this. came from Methodism, came from
Oh, it
Baptists,
did.
Well, that's
came
It
from
true.
did.
Lutherans,
And
came
Catholics.
from can I use the bigger one?
The mother
Came from
church.
the mother church,
There you
Catholicism.
go.
Most of the
Right.
things that we have came from there. And if most of us recognize that, those are who are revelation browbeaters of worship styles, most of our worship styles came from Catholicism.
Especially
Right.
the
And that's why
silent.
I asked the question. That's why I asked the question. Is
You
there a
should not
template?
have, Chuck.
Is there a this is how you do it class for worship?
no.
This is
So
how you do it.
Oh,
I knew
yeah,
it was
right.
coming. I
That's
knew
the
it was
only
class.
thing
Yes.
GP
Yeah.
could come on with is that.
Right. But now on styles of worship, because this also has affected communal worship before COVID, during COVID, and it will
Very much
be
so now.
a problem after
Mhm.
COVID.
I-
And I'm
We-
sure many of us have run into at least someone that says, "Oh no, I don't worship over there. It's dead,"
Yeah.
or
One-
their music is,
Yeah.
I'm an Ebenezer, not a North Philly. It's bringing
yeah,
it closer
yeah.
to home.
Mhm.
Um, how does that affect the discussion of a need to worship? But when some people are either not intentionally ostracized, but pushed away because it's not their kind of music, it's not their kind of preaching, it's not their kind of, or it's too noisy, or some places say, oh, it's too quiet. These folk don't say amen. Do they say amen? Do they know the word? What's going on here?
Let me I introduce the word epistemology, and that is how you develop your knowledge, and that is, and that's what I've been trying to lay out. Worship
Mhm.
is a response to the revelation of God that says He is higher and worthy, and I must recognize that. I must
Mhm.
recognize His sovereignty above my own. What happens after that are acts of worship.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And so what we need to do when we're planning, quote, a worship service, or let's drop the word worship. When we're planning services or fellowship activities that are to lead us into worship, we have to ask ourselves, to what degree is this act going to enhance the revelation of God or enhance our response that reflects our recognition of His sovereignty? So, for example, an offertory, which is a great act of worship, because you're saying, God, you're so great. I'm bringing to you
Mhm.
my
Mhm.
substance and recognizing my stewardship. An act of singing, which is saying, you're so great that I am praising you. This is enhancing my response. So we have to ask ourselves, to what degree is this action either enhancing the revelation or enhancing my response to the revelation that leads me deeper into reflecting the worth of God in my life by what I do?
But that
Chuck,
gets tricky
go ahead.
though, right? I'm sorry. That gets tricky because it's not necessarily the same for
For all people.
individuals. Yeah,
Yeah.
Right.
so you
Uh,
you
And
kind of
that's why
have
in the
to
Bible, when it says, clap your hands, that doesn't mean that that's what you have to do to worship.
right,
Right.
It
right,
meant that the people that they were writing to recognized that the clapping of the hands signified an act of exaltation or extolling. There are
mhm,
other places where the raising of the hands signifies it. There are other
right,
places where folding of the hands may signify it.
right,
You have to know what culture you're speaking to.
right,
Mhm.
And then in doing that, you're saying, to what degree am I enhancing the revelation or
right.
enhancing the response to the revelation?
Yes.
Well, I see that. Go ahead. Go ahead,
Go
Pat.
ahead, Marlena, please.
I mean, I see that both ways, that, everyone doesn't have to reverence God the same way. So I don't think that there should be judgment on either side. As we were speaking offline, when other cultures come and tell you how to worship, I think that
Mhm.
presents a problem. And when you had a form of worship that was praiseworthy in your sight, that you were giving, unto God, and then they tell you that is evil, and demons are a part of it, and so now you feel you have to go to their form of worship, to be accepted. And so others who may want to worship in another charismatic way, well, now you're sinful because the holy is full of quietness, then I
Mhm.
think that
Mhm.
becomes a problem
Mhm.
on both sides. If you
Yes.
want to sit and be quiet, that's fine. let me clap my hands. Don't, think that I'm the devil, because I do clap my hands in praise and in my response to my style of worship. So I think that, we have to understand that God didn't tell us, you know, if you were to have a drum,
Right.
help me in this place.
You know,
It's
Marlena,
you of the devil.
what
Or
And that's happened to
especially
me
when
Mhm.
David says in Psalms 150, let everything that have breath, praise the Lord. And then he tells you to
Right.
bring all those instruments in the sanctuary, not the fellowship hall, but in the sanctuary, then I just think that when it comes to praise and worship, let's follow the word and not someone's tradition. That's what I'm
Well,
saying, Tally. That's what I'm saying on the
well, it's
books.
not quite. In this, and that's another part. In the sanctuary, we have no sanctuary. We have fellowship buildings. The sanctuary was a place where nobody went to worship. I mean, even the priests had to be careful going in there, and and
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
so
So what is David saying when he says bring it in the sanctuary?
he's just talking about coming before God, coming into
Hmm.
fellowship.
Yes.
Nobody went into the sanctuary except certain priests. And when it came to the most holy place, just one, and that was only once a year.
All right, but we have a
But
copy of we have a copy that we're calling the sanctuary, right?
well, we make
Our
it up.
place of fellowship, right?
Well, we have a fellowship
What'd you
hall. We
say?
have a place of
You said we
fellowship.
made it up?
he
Yeah.
says,
We make it up.
you,
We
you,
make it up
you're
so
not,
we can try to get people to be quiet when you come.
Nick.
For the Lord is in His holy place. Let all the earth be
Let all the
silent
earth
before Him.
keep
That ain't got nothing to
silence
do with what
before him.
happened. Yeah,
Nick,
we
can you be
making
quiet
stuff
for a
up.
second before
Reverence my
It's out there.
sanctuary. Reverence my
Yes.
Reverence my
sanctuary.
Yeah.
GP? I know
Yeah,
exactly what you're talking about, GP, and I can
yeah.
say this. I
Man.
grew up in a West Indian, Caribbean household, both, and they worship the Queen. Yeah, okay, y'all get that another day, but that's all right.
Uh-huh. We
Yeah.
got
Right?
it.
All of the
That's a
churches,
three-part.
all of the
Part 3.
all of the churches says reverence my sanctuary on every
Yeah.
in every church that I've gone into in Jamaica. It says reverence my sanctuary right above it.
Mm.
Right,
Mm.
all of them that you go into it. I was taught that when I preach, and I still do it, I don't preach in the same shoes that I walk into the sanctuary with. I mean, I have preaching shoes.
You got preaching shoes?
You
I have preaching
you have
Wow.
preaching shoes?
Yeah,
Mm.
but
Wow.
remember
Who are they
now.
made by?
Remember,
Adidas? Who? I mean,
The most
no, I
holy
want to see.
one.
Can I
I
you know
got
find
what?
these on
preaching
Amazon?
shoes.
Now, I'm just done with y'all now. I thought we could talk.
Yeah.
So you
Go,
walk in. So
No.
go
Pat, you
ahead,
walk
Pat.
in
Be
with
real.
Nike.
Go ahead.
You
No,
walk in
I
with Nikes,
don't. You know what?
No, explain to us
Yeah,
why,
and then
though.
you put
I'm
on
sure
dress shoes to
it's
go
a
in the
good.
pulpit.
No, I don't do it that way. But there's
Okay.
shoes that I
Well,
have
yeah.
that when I'm preaching, I wear those shoes. And let me tell you something.
Okay.
It doesn't do anything to me, but makes me feel that those shoes are
Gotcha.
shoes for God.
That's
That's all it does for me. It's not. You don't have to wear
It's
it. I'm
for
not
you.
Are
sure.
the heels
Right.
higher because
They nice, man. They nice. They nice. To
the
me,
Lord is high and lifted up,
yeah.
or
Are the bottom red for the blood of Jesus?
that gives new
You know
meaning
what,
to
Pat?
precious
You know,
soul.
Pat
GP,
is regretting. He's
Everybody's gonna be
regretting we
checking out your
mentioned it
shoes
now.
I
now.
sure regret it. I sure regret it.
Everybody's gonna be checking them out.
And the truth is that I don't worship God. I'm just gonna be honest with you. I'm talking about home now. I
Mhm.
don't worship God in an undershirt and whichever.
Mm.
I'm telling you tradition, what tradition has taught me, right? So I don't
Mhm.
worship God that way. I always feel like I have to be not dressed, but I have to be covered or whatever the case may be.
Right.
Nick, don't say anything, Nick.
Let-
I see you ready. I
No,
see
I
you
have a
ready.
response to that, though, Pat.
No, I'm
I
actually
think
thinking the
this
same
Well,
way because
this
David
that's
was
goes
my
back
bare
naked
to
too
the
when
robes.
he danced
discussion.
before the Lord.
No, but it's tradition. I'm saying it's
Yeah, but
Yeah, I
this
get it.
goes
I
back
get
to style of
Marlena say he was
worship.
naked when he danced. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah,
Man,
what you said is leading to going back to that discussion of style of worship.
Sure.
Now there are some people. In fact, I know a very popular church in Baltimore that had one Sabbath where you just come as you are.
Mhm.
hmm
No suit, no, you got sneakers, you got jeans, you just walk on in.
It comes part
Because there are some people who feel that they are not obligated to dress up to
Mhm.
go to worship at church. And so why not welcome them? There are others who feel like, oh, that's blasphemy. You walk into the house of worship and you got sneakers and jeans
Mhm.
on and a sweatshirt.
Disrespectful.
That's not being, respectful to the Lord. And yet that person is there explicitly for worship and the experience of being with, fellowshipping and all, because now they feel accepted in the state that they're in.
Sure.
That's
Chuck,
right.
we start even when we were in the green room when we were talking before this. It has to come down to your personal relationship with God, right?
Exactly.
The way you accept how He reveals Himself to you. That's my walk. That's my
Right.
takeaway. Thanks, Nick, for that.
Right.
My as a priest of or a under shepherd in a church, I need to introduce in every segment of the service some type of worship aspect for the people who are coming. I feel that's my responsibility. So when I think about going to the White House and somebody tells me, Pat, you're going to meet George Bush. We're taking you to meet President Obama. That's it. We stop there. Right. And when you tell them, I'm trying to figure out am I going to groom? How am I going to be dressed?
No, you're going to dress up.
When I say no, we're going to dress up. We're going to dress up.
It
Now,
depends on your personality.
That's it.
I've seen people go to the White House that are not dressed up.
I agree with you 100%, and that's the reason why what I was saying before. You have to have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. You have to have a personal, and I want to take this a little bit deeper, because when we say Jesus Christ, it sounds nominal to us. My Maker, right? My King. So some people might laugh if you turn it back, and you might laugh and say, Pat, what, you got shoes just for when you preach? Yeah, but that's me and God, though. You know what I mean? That's you could call it whatever you want to call it, but that's how I do it. But I can never say, Nick, you need to do A, B, and C.
Right.
Or GP, this is what you got to do before you get up. And I know we're coming down to as we land in this plane. One thing they did teach us, I was in Dr. Jones' class and Dr. Elder and Nixon's class, both of their classes, because I got up and tried to be like non-black there. And this is what they did. They said, I want you to study now the black diaspora. Am I saying the right word? That diaspora. You say that's it, diaspora. I want you to study that and how African Americans respond to their God. It changes everything. Everything changed. Regional conferences. Now you understand why we need them. Now you understand the urban centers of our regional conferences. Now you understand how that comes alive. And going back to you, Marlena, this is the reason why people want to come together, because it's in our culture that we come. It's in our culture,
absolutely.
Right? Yeah. It's in our culture that we meet up at the end of the block and play marbles. It's our culture that we come together and play tag. Therefore, we come together so that iron can sharpen iron. But you bring your relationship with Christ to that circle. You don't.
But I'm hoping that the pandemic has taught us a lesson about communal worship and fellowship. If we go back to normal, some people will end up back on Zoom.
Yeah,
because they're not getting the fellowship, they're not getting the communal relationship. They're getting a mechanized theatric performance.
Yeah.
Now that's kind of like my wrap-up statement, but I have a burning question for you.
I thought you said that you're not a theologian, and this is not.
I am not a theologian.
Okay,
but I have this burning question based on the statement you made.
Just plays one on TV.
When you arrive at your preaching assignment and you have accidentally left your preaching shoes home, do you go barefoot?
No, I don't.
What do you do?
Just preaching what you have.
Preaching what I have.
Okay. Just curious. Because you seem very animate about that. You're like, I have a preaching shoes.
You know what I did? In youth ministry has forced me to let go of the tradition of wearing a tie and a robe. Same message.
I wear my robes and it's fine with the youth.
No. I mean that could, and I understand, but remember now, we can't determine each other how we do,
They
right?
just didn't want him to wear a robe.
Oh, okay.
If you
Yeah,
if
they
you
didn't want
wear
him to wear,
I've heard
because if
that.
he wears a robe, you can't see
wear
his feet. It looks like he's floating.
before I give my closing statement, Pat, if you wore bedroom slippers into the pulpit, would you flip flop in your sermon?
Oh my
Okay.
goodness.
All right. Now let me.
See,
I
Evan?
Is
just
there
I
a
had
drum
to.
that's supposed to come after that?
Yeah, yeah,
No.
yeah. But
I had to.
I want people
Horny.
to comment. No, I want people to comment. I
You
want
need
everybody
more
to take
shoes,
time
man.
right now in the chat and comment after that from 1 to 10.
But,
Tell me how
but
deep that one
a
was.
lot of
They
what we
like
ask,
his humor.
a lot of what we ask in this, and we need to do a second one on this
Sure.
Mhm.
Yep.
is there was an architectural movement in the early 1900s that said form follows function. In other words, what's the function? And you make the form to follow the
Mhm.
function, or is it the other way around in religion?
Mm.
Does function follow form? For
Mm.
example, I preach in a robe, and I do that for the same reason why Pat has those shoes. When I put that robe on, it tells me that I am in a different place for a different purpose.
Mhm.
It
Yes.
tells me that, and so even though there's no such thing as a sanctuary, if we call it that, maybe it'll change our mind. We'll realize, because we'll say silly things, for example, like, "Man, you gonna lie in the sanctuary?" As though God ain't outside in the hallway.
That's right.
I mean,
That's right.
Right.
the funniest thing I used to see was people putting money in an envelope to give it to you on Sabbath because God can't see through the envelope, you see. I mean, little things like that. But we do these things because the form
Right.
helps us to
Good
change
point.
our function. And maybe
Mhm.
Good
that's
point.
something we need to
Good point.
recognize in
Yes,
trying to create
I agree.
actions or
Yeah,
events that allow us
That's
to
a good
either
word right
strengthen our
there, Brother Nick.
yeah,
revelation
That's a good
or
word.
our
You know,
response to the
Yeah,
revelation.
that's
Yeah.
excellent.
I have to
that's
say, I know that the upsetters come together upset, but you have upset me, and in a good way. Nick, stop it. In a good way,
No, man.
we're required to think about why we do the
Sure.
things we do,
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Mhm.
and
Absolutely.
God is not going to punish us for thinking.
That's right.
And I think that's one of the biggest things. And once you say something that doesn't sound normal or it just doesn't follow the grain of what we've been doing for the past 30, 40 years, we all of a sudden feel that we're wrong about it. No, I'm asking somebody, and I'll do this in my landing gear. I'm asking somebody to rethink how you worship
Mhm.
and go back and think about the
Right.
reverence of it, the
That's the
acts of
point.
it, and see,
Right.
am I in line with God? Because I do believe that this episode or the one to follow is for those who are listening, for them to be able to ask God, am I,
Mhm.
Holy Spirit, am
And
I,
themselves. Right.
yeah, and of
Mhm.
course, and
Mhm.
themselves, am I in line? Am I worshiping, or is this a form that
Mhm.
I've been going through? I
Right,
land
right.
my plane on that, Nick, and you could borrow my shoes if you want to.
I'm perfectly fine.
I think you do a whole lot better in your preaching style if you borrowed my shoes.
I think some of the things we've said today just knocked me right out of my shoes and took me.
I haven't said much, but I want to chime in. This has been a rich discussion, but I think I want to just encourage somebody, whether you're attending church virtually or whether you've been going back to your church in person with a
Right.
mask.
Right.
Remember that proximity to the things of God is not equivalent to a relationship with God. And
Amen.
so you may
Mm.
be doing all the right
Nice.
things, going to all the
Very
right
good.
places.
Right.
Proximity to the things of God
Right.
is not a relationship with God. Nothing can replace
Right.
a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And so my
That's right.
prayer for you is that, as Tally mentioned, that we would receive a revelation of who God is, and that
Mhm.
in
Amen.
response, we would have the proper posture always.
Well
Amen.
said.
Well, I
Amen.
just want to thank you guys. You've been kind to me because, being a civilian, you guys are very nice. Very nice.
Yeah, we chose that.
I will remember those shoes though, because I'm, when you said that, I'm just
Write
imagining,
that down.
you coming through heaven and the Lord says, Pat, 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 Pat. Hey, look,
Where your shoes?
I really like the shoes, but wasn't necessary.
Oh
All
no,
God's
Charles.
people got shoes. All
you-
God's people got shoes.
You know, the scripture said, "How blessed are the feet of those who preach the tidings."
That's right. I don't think I'm going to live this down. I can
You
Oh,
know,
never,
I don't think I'm
you're
going
never.
to live this
gonna
one
try to
down.
spare his soul, and
Yeah.
You will be in your
You're gonna
coffin,
get-
and everybody's gonna look down inside.
Take a look at the shoes,
What
right?
shoes you got
Let's
on?
see,
You're
this
gonna
is
start getting
flyaway
emojis
shoes.
with sneakers. You know.
I got you. Latasha, if
my
you will,
God.
just switch me up with GP. He's holding the baby right now for the announcement that's coming up for our upsetters.
No,
This-
Elizabeth can point.
She
See,
can point. Yeah,
Yes, she can.
Elizabeth, show them where they can
Absolutely.
reach
Yes, yes.
us. Yes, very
Yeah.
yes, she
good,
is.
Elizabeth. Yes, we want to hear your comments about what we discussed, and we're not live this week, but we will be next week, and we want to keep this discussion going on about worship. We think it's that important. We believe that once we fully understand what it is and what it looks like, we can do it even better. So
That's right.
email us some of your comments, some of the things you want us to address on the live show next week, and we will be certain to bring those things up. Great discussion, guys. I feel full, you know. I feel like, you know,
like buying shoes or
no,
Humor.
I think the highest part of this was when GP quoted Montel Jordan.
this is how we do
This is
it.
how we do it. No, but
no.
on a serious note, there's a song that Novell Peters sings. It's called Personal.
Mm.
You know about that, Pat? Personal.
Yep.
So he talks about how he was going through the motions as a young person, but now he's older. He has a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. This time it's personal.
Yeah.
You
This
know, I
sounds
remember
personal.
when
Yes,
yeah.
I've heard that. Right.
powerful testimony. And that's my testimony as well. You know, went to boarding school,
Amen.
but it wasn't until I left home I knew
There you
Jesus for
go.
myself when I left,
There you go.
because I was
Right.
relying on my parents' relationship, just like
Mhm.
Pat. And so it's important to
Right.
have that personal
Yep.
relationship with Jesus Christ. So
I'm gonna put the
Amen.
song in the chat for everybody so that they can see it.
Mhm.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yep.
Thank you,
All right,
guys.
guys, this has been rich. Thank you guys for the dialogue.
You hear that end song right now.
So what?
That
It
end
would be
song.
nice actually if we could play that. Maybe we'll play that part of that song on the live. All right, guys, we'll see you next time. Take
Bye,
care.
guys. Have a blessed
care.
week.
Bye-bye.
Follow and like and
Take care,
subscribe to
everybody.
all of us.